Welcome to the Culture Bar, a panel discussion podcast exploring, dissecting, and shedding light on important topics in the arts and music world which matter to you. Welcome to Creative Iceland, a special Culture Bar podcast series focusing on the creative scene in Iceland. I am Arna Margrét Jónsdóttir from HarrisonParrott, and I will be your host on this series, where I will be speaking with fellow Icelanders about various topics related to the creative scene in Iceland. For our first episode, we are joined by Dr. Arnar Eggert Thoroddsen, an Icelandic music journalist and scholar, and we will discuss the popular assertion that the unique natural environment is the source of creative inspiration for artists and creatives in Iceland. Iceland has long been associated with a high level of creativity, and many believe the country's striking natural environment is a major contributing factor when it comes to creative inspiration. During this interview, we will focus on the music scene and explore why this connection between nature and creativity has become so dominant in the discourse around the creative scene in Iceland, and how it affects the artists and the scene as a whole. Thoroddsen is the director of the undergraduate media and communication studies program at the University of Iceland. He earned his master's degree from the University of Edinburgh in 2013 and a PhD in 2019 from the same university, where he carried out a research on the social dynamics of Icelandic musicians under the supervision of Professor Simon Frith. He is the author of 3 books on Icelandic music, with the 4th in the writing stage. He's been writing about music and popular culture since 1999, mainly for Morgunblaðið Daily, but his writings have also appeared in article collections and music sites abroad. So, hello Arnar, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I think, we can perhaps start this off by you telling us a bit more about yourself.
Well, as you said in the introduction, I think it's all covered, but I'm working here in the Academia of Iceland, looking into sociology and the music culture, and teaching like cultural sociology. But I'm also a music critic, so I've been writing a lot about Icelandic musicians, and I'm also part of a lot of music juries, or deciding who gets a prize and who not. And I've been doing all kinds of music activities, and one of them, really going into it academic wise, and like my PhD handled the society, if we can say that, of Icelandic musicians. And of course, the topic that we are going to address today always comes into play.
Great, so thank you. I think, yes, we will perhaps just begin with a more general discourse around the nature-inspiring creativity topic. And is it a well-known motive?
Well, it's a well-known motive, but we have to, and this has been contested. And it has been contested more of late. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was more taken as a given. But as people have looked at matters more closely, and like I did in my PhD, of course, Icelandic nature has an effect in some way, but it's much more weaker, I would propose, than people want it to be. And when I think there's a key, what people want it to be. Foreign journalists want it to be simple, and they want it to be very direct influence on music making here in Iceland. But when you talk about the actual Icelandic musicians, you hear another story. So this is a fabricated discourse, made by journalists to sell headlines, and it's completely understandable. That's just how the media works. So there has been a very interesting challenge and interesting, we could say, literature to try to deconstruct this myth of what you're addressing here. Just so I take the topic and throw it out of the window at the beginning.
No, but of course, this is part of the topic, so really interesting. And maybe if you can elaborate a bit more on the researches and what they have found.
Yeah, two things just from the top of my head, and so I won't forget. A friend of mine, Nick Pryor, which is a cultural sociologist at the University of Edinburgh, he did a very nice, I would say groundbreaking research here in Iceland, where he came to Reykjavik and just made a on the ground sociological research on what was actually going on with the Icelandic musicians. And just the title of the article is, "It's not a nature thing, it's a social thing." So he found out, which somehow is quite clear when you just think about it logically, that the Icelandic music society is driven by individuals and connections. It's not driven by walking up on Mountain Asia and look over the landscape and get inspired by that. It's too simple. But I understand, especially like music export offices, tourist offices, wherever they are, they need simple messages. So that's why this, whoa, do you live in Iceland? So you must be a great musician and make a beautiful music because you saw a lava field yesterday. And that's fine, but when you go to the nitty-gritty of it, it isn't true. And then I partook in an article the other day with my colleagues here in the university, where a discourse, media discourse was analyzed, how like the British media writes about Icelandic music. And it's all, in that way, easy similarities between, Jóns's guitar from Sigur sounds like molten lava and all that. And and I've been thinking, what about rock bands from Hawaii? Do their guitars also sound like volcanoes?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
There are volcanoes in Hawaii, but there's no scene in Hawaii where the pop bands there, that their little Hawaiian guitars sound like molten lava. So just this statement absolutely demolishes the argument somehow. And so but I understand, and also this Nordic thing and the cold and all this dramatic thing, which the musicians of course play up to as well. That makes it a little bit complex, when the musicians themselves are also like feeding this machine. And but yeah, and we both found out in this analyzing the media discourse that there were these cheap allegories, and also Icelandic musicians always just liken to other Icelandic musicians, especially young woman musicians are always likened to Björk, So, but as I'm a journalist myself, I have I know how these things works as well. You need simple things, and you're working under stress. And when you go to the Icelander Festival, the editor wants lava and geysers. It's as simple as that. If you look at how people have written about Icelander Festival, it's always the same article you're reading about how the crazy Icelanders are, and how creative they are, and then this nature thing, And I don't want to sound too sarcastic or anything like that, but it's not as simple as people would like to have it.
Yeah. So how do you think this affects the overall image of the creative scene in Iceland when it's just focusing perhaps so much on this nature connection?
There are two things, or there's one thing with two sides going on, which I find really interesting. That, of course, some Icelandic musicians play up to, what is needed from them or what is expected. And, and I've talked to some musicians, and they have the sense that in some way, some artists are doing things maybe not straight from the heart, but what they think will have an effect. Like, doing videos in the beaches and this nature kind of videos. Then there are Icelandic musicians that are, contesting this, and, they don't want to take part of it. And, they say, which is true, You know, I've never ventured outside of Reykjavik. You know, I'm a city kid. You know, I just listen to Velvet Underground and Sonic Youth, and I'm just holed up in a garage in the west side of Reykjavik, doing indie music, which I read about in the British press. So this is kind of taking people down. That, you know, all Western societies are. You know, it's just people go. You know, there's all kinds of people in Iceland. There are creative people, but there's also, you know, people are always so shocked when I tell them that we also have bad musicians in Iceland. It doesn't fit the criteria.
Wow, yeah.
You know, everything is great, everything is beautiful.
Yeah. So do you think perhaps if we move this a bit into then the exercise in nation branding, so this is then quite connected perhaps in some way?
Yeah, as I said, just if I turn myself into a cold shark, you know, and I worked with, you know, the export music office in Iceland and all these people who are, you know, and more power to them, naturally trying to sell Icelandic music abroad. And, you know, it just needs some tricks of the trade, you know, and that's good. I'm absolutely not saying it's a bad thing. It's just part of how things work. So we have that, and, you know, there's a bit of, or, you know, of this nation branding, you know, like, you know, trying to lure people into Iceland to record. And then you say, you know, come to Iceland to record because it's so beautiful here. And, you know, it's true, it's beautiful here. And people go maybe to scenic studios outside in the country, and, you know, that somehow works. But as I say, sometimes it goes too far, like with this nation branding. And I'm very uneasy with, you know, talking about music and branding. But I can't say a lot. You know, my field of expertise is pop music, which is a manufactured music at the heart of it, you know. So I can't say anything, you know, I'm the devil's advocate.
Yeah. So do you think, yeah, like you mentioned, that some artists might find this discourse around this a bit restricting when it comes to creating and having to play up to this?
Yeah, you know, in a way, you know, of course, we have all kinds of music in Iceland, and you know, some of it aligns to these things, some not. I'm thinking of like Kæla Mikla, our Gothic band, 3 girls doing this Gothic music, and they somehow managed to cover 2 fields at once. They're doing this straight, you know, general Gothic stuff, which has been going for 30, 40 years, but they also have this Nordic Vixen, you know, something magical happening side to them too. But they could be from Norway or Sweden or Finland, you know. They couldn't be from Morocco, but, you know, they have this Nordic Icelandic thing, but also somehow general, you know. Now I've completely forgotten what you were asking me about.
Yeah, no, it was just if some artists or creatives might think that this label around nature and like acts as a restriction when they are creating, and they have to create something specifically to fit into this.
Yeah, but I think, you know, I think some, you know, some bands are just doing their stuff. Like we have reggae bands in Iceland who are just doing their Nordic reggae somehow. And you know, they don't think about this. Then I think about bands like Solstafir, which is like an atmospheric black metal band, and they somehow connect to nature in all the right ways. You know, they have this vast, epic songs that remind of you know, hailstorm or you know, something like that. And I think they haven't thought that far about it. They're in a way just doing their stuff. And, you know, if it fits into some kind of a Nordic ideas about music, then fine, you know. I think that's a good example of a band that's truthful to their art, but it just so happens that it ticks all the right Nordic branding boxes. So I would never, you know, accuse them of, you know, you're playing up to what's expected, because they are not. And then, you know, it's also difficult to judge, you know. And, you know, and I was going to say, I'm not going to judge, but I'm a music critic, so I'm constantly judging these things.
So do you perhaps think that musicians and all the artists that are not maybe in this kind of nature box, do they have more difficult time getting their art outside of Iceland?
That's a really good question. It's interesting. I'm going to give an example here, that the bands who are traveling abroad to Iceland, like Ásgeir, Sóley, you know, it seems to be a market for these kind of Scandinavian indie type things with a touch of experimental björkishness to it, or something like that. It's like this road has been established somehow. But then let's take Icelandic hip hop, for example. You know, first of all, there has not been made any real effort of branding it outside of Iceland. But then maybe, and I'm thinking out loud here, it seemed to be a bit harder to, you know, hey, here's a hip hop group from Iceland. And I don't know. And then, you know, because there's very strong hip hop scenes in like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, often with, you know, immigrants are often leading these scenes. But it's like it's more difficult for them to travel. I'm thinking about artists like Lykke Li from Sweden, and these Eivør from the Faroe Islands, and maybe Sóley, Björk from Iceland, these Scandinavian noir princesses. They seem to have more access to international markets for some reason. I find it interesting that, and like at the start of our talk, and, you know, questions that I often get from, let's say, foreign journalists, is they assume there's a very direct influence from nature to creativity in Iceland. And I think, you know, then if I'm imagining I'm talking to a foreign journalist now, I have to ask, can you explain to me how that works? Are you saying that if a 4-year-old child, you know, travels around with its parents, you know, around Iceland, are you telling me that being exposed to this beautiful nature will affect some kind of a songwriting? Maybe, but I think it's really difficult to see a direct, you know, connection. Of course, it finds a way in some ways. You know, you write things about what you see around you, but that is applicable to every nation. You know, musicians from Croatia, they maybe write about beautiful lakes and, you know, being, you know, stuff like that. Even if you're in Denmark, you know, we Icelanders, of course, use every opportunity to take a little bit of dick at the Danes. But, you know, even them, you know, they can somehow just write about things that are around us. You know, I think that's just being an artist, you know, being from Greenland or Denmark or Russia. You can write about the things that are around you. So I think maybe that the nature has this huge effect. I think we have to slow down a little bit.
Yeah, and also, yeah, like we discussed, so many other countries have great nature, but somehow they are not linked to this like nature inspiring creativity like it is in Iceland.
Yes, I think we're also benefiting from kind of a romantic ideal that like the Brits and the US have of the North. And, you know, this has been called by my friend Kristin Skram, and he's a folklorist, this effect that he calls Borealism, which we can connect into Orientalism. That, you know, and I met people like this in Scotland when I was doing my studies, that they have these, you know, rose-tinted glasses view of the North, you know, that the jazz from the North is some kind of inspired by the tundra, and, you know, and you know, when you want things to be somehow, you're so eager to that you're kind of imagining that they are like that, you know. It's a really strong a driver in people, it seems. And I met these people where they admit that, you know, I have to admit I have a very romantic view of, you know, North Norway, Iceland, blah blah blah. Then often when people come to Iceland and see people going into grocery stores, you know, this might somehow crumbles.
Yeah, seeing that Icelandic people are just regular people that need to do their grocery shopping.
Yeah, like people in Scotland and England, just a Western nation, first and foremost.
So yeah, like you're talking about, it's more from the outside in than from in to the outside.
Yes, that's my feeling, that the Icelandic music scene somehow gets caught up in, you know, a big media machine in the UK and the US, where people are churning out articles about the Northern Lights and the tundra and whatever. And then somehow, you know, reality begins to be distorted, you know. And like, you know, Orientalism and Borealism, it's like a cartoonic view of what's happening in these countries. And, you know, we want exciting stuff. We want them to be more adventurous than they really are. And, you know, I think that's just a part of being a human being. You know, when I moved to Scotland, I had very romantic ideas about Scotland, but there were much less kilts, less bagpipes, and less things that I had imagined. There were people, unfortunately, going to grocery stores. So my ideas about Scotland crumbled.
Yeah. And now in Iceland, of course, yeah, as we mentioned a bit earlier about the nation branding, now we had a campaign in Iceland called Inspired by Iceland.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that was the result of the financial crash in Iceland and volcano eruption. So we were kind of building back and trying to get tourists to come and visit the country. And mainly the two focus of this campaign was the nature and the creativity.
Inspired by Iceland, nature and creativity. Yes, you know, as I say, understandable. And I've made my academic case. And as I say, inspired by Iceland, that thing is, as I say, a very understandable effort of when you're, you know, doing tourist efforts. Like the Iceland Airwaves Festival was established at the time to generate more tourists, and, you know, when we had mainly summer tourists, not winter tourists. Now we even don't need any effort because it's, you know, all year around. But it's always two-folded, you know. It's not only, you know, great for the music industry, but also just to generate, how can we get people to Iceland? And then you throw these lines at them. And you've heard about the story. There's a movie which was made in the middle of the 20th century in Hollywood called Brigadoon, if I remember correctly, which was supposed to happen in Scotland. And the Hollywood producers went to Scotland to find locations. And they went back and said, we can't shoot this movie in Scotland because there's nothing in Scotland that reminds us of Scotland. So they made a set in Hollywood. So I think this is a very clear example of, that they had very fixed ideals of how Scottish things were, so they just made them themselves instead of going to the location. This is a very twisted thing, but also, when you're making these cartoonic ideals, you can never live up to them when you're actually going into the place. Like the poor tourists, their first spot in Reykjavik is usually going to BSE, the most dreadful bus station in the world. Nothing creative or beautiful about it. It's just dreadful.
Yes. So perhaps in your opinion, listening to what you have talked about, what are the main things that contribute to the creative scene in Iceland?
Really good. Another good question. I think we have to look at the proximity of the scene. We are few, 350,000. Everybody knows each other, and this non-bureaucratic way of living generates often high-speed doing. And you as an Icelander, you know all about this. People just charge into things and they make them happen. And there are theories that this is because of the old, you had to go to fish when the fish was in the sea, so you had to be flexible. And this this construct of how people talk amongst themselves, how all the institutions here are, lightweight in that, you can absolutely walk into the offices of people and say, "Hi, how are you doing? I met you last weekend at my mom's birthday party," and stuff like that. The musicians themselves have told me that this inspires them or makes it easier for them to go ahead. Both, it's easy in that way that there are people ready to help them. And also when people in your, proximity, that, that your friend's brother is a famous pop star, then you automatically think, hey, if he can do it, I can do it. And so now I'm painting a very beautiful sociological picture of things, but this is one of the social factors here in Iceland that is driving the music scene here. I think we can't contest that. And also the big cooperations between all these small scenes that, if you're a young player in a jazz band, you probably know this guy in the hip hop band, or you at least know who he is. So all these cooperations between genres is also very beautiful to see. This, of course, stifles things as well, that you're always playing with the same people and the same audience. But this at least gets you out of bed, it seems.
Yes. Yeah, you've read about some musicians being in 5 bands, and the genre is one of it's jazz band, one of a pop band. So as you mentioned, I think that is a really big factor, how easily you can create something with people, and you don't have to kind of label yourself, I think.
You can't.
No.
You can't be a working musician in Iceland and decide I'm only going to play jazz, because you just don't get that many gigs. So you have to be versatile. And of course, this has been romanticized as well, this how Icelanders always do things, la 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 la, and they're so unafraid, and they just, run into things, la 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 la. Also, this has been romanticized, but there's, as well as there's truth to it as well, and the poor journalists who come to Iceland and they send me a line, "Can you meet me?" And I always answer, "Yeah, let's meet tomorrow and have a coffee." And they can't calculate this in their minds, because it's 2 weeks.
Yeah. But yes, you have talked with several journalists.
Mm.
Do you feel like this discourse around the nature is getting stronger, or is it staying the same? And do you perhaps remember when it started to be such a big motive in journalist writing?
Yeah, I think this is at least static, maybe not stronger, but at least static, because it doesn't matter if I'm and two other scholars are pointing to other things. I think it's too strong, this image, that I think it will persevere, absolutely. And I think, if I'm just gonna be, I think just from the sugar cubes and onwards, I think this has been the main discourse, this nature connections. Starts with the sugar cubes, we go into Björk, and then Gus Gus, and Gus Gus had their photos taken in the mountains and stuff like that. So I think it's very, I don't see any, ups and downs in this discourse. I think it has been very steady.
Yeah.
And then you can talk, is it bad, is it good? I think it goes, both ways. Often just depends on the artists.
Yeah. Do you, like the export offices, the Iceland Music Exports and the other creative export offices, do you think they have contributed to this discourse?
Well, of course, and maybe I have to backtrack a little bit. I hope I wasn't painting them up as cold sharks, as I said, because they're not. Because I think, and I'm just gonna put it out as well, the music export of the Icelandic Music Export Office, which has not been long, it's around 2006, 2007, it was established. I think they've done a great job to, tighten the infrastructure of Icelandic music life and enabling Icelandic musicians to go abroad. And, you just need to use some, tools of the trade to do that. And, fine. And I would never, paint them up as, some devils. And, I'm partaking in all kinds of things. Like I'm a part of the jury of the Nordic Music Prize, which is not the Nordic Council Music Prize, which is another award, which I'm also a member of the jury there. But this Nordic Music Prize was, of course, like, how can we make people notice more Scandinavian music? So one of the things you can do is establish a prize and put it in the media to make it more visual somehow. And tricks are used there as well, but the main thing, of course, the end result is just to get the music out there, get someone to listen, try to get different musicians, get them on their feet, and that they can have a market and some working market which they can use. That would be the beautiful end result, which has been established in some cases. Like with the Icelandic music export, that there are Icelandic artists which have they've gotten funds and grants, and there's a walk-in policy with the office. You could walk in, hey, I'm a young musician, I don't know anything, can you assist me? And he will get an interview.
And it's also quite interesting to see that we have had a lot of famous artists in Iceland coming to Iceland, like Justin Bieber, and he did a video in the nature. And of course also filming is quite popular now in Iceland.
Yes, and great, great stuff. It's just it's too blatantly obvious to not use these opportunities. A setting for some kind of a Lord of the Rings movie, and you have the perfect landscape to help the set, help the movie. Fine, and you get all these people in, and they're buying sandwiches and food. So I sound like a capitalist now, but I'm all for this as well. Why the hell not?
Yeah.
So, but it's a long talk over the coffee, you know, artistic integrity, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, yeah.
Have you ever met an artist that is completely against this nature thing and really is angry with how this has developed?
I think some of them just get a little bit tired at times, and you get these, and that's also understandable that around airwaves, when all these music tourists come to Iceland, and the Icelandic music nerds, the Faroe Island, our brothers and sisters in the Faroe Island, they call these people Faroe freaks. You know, people may be living in Seattle and they're obsessed, you know, by Icelandic music, you know, and they buy everything that they can buy and whatever, and you know, and they come, and just to give you an example, there was a band, and the photographer comes and you say, hey, I want to take you horseback riding in the mountains for this photo session. And they say, I've never ridden a horse in my life, you know. You know, to answer the question, I think maybe they get tired, but I think most of them are clever, and you know, they know it just comes with the, what do you say? It just comes with the territory, you know. You just can't escape it, and you can maybe control it a little bit, what you're willing to do. And we have artists that make a sarcastic play out of this. I remember a very nice promotional photo of Muggisson, where he was screaming in some kind of a seaman's outfit. You know, it was very overboard image of an Icelandic fisherman, and you could see that he was poking fun at what people want to see. And also our Viking rock band Skálmöld, they have also, you know, kind of joked about this, you know, and made over-the-top promotional photos as well. I always like this when people can somehow go out of the frame and just, you know, nod their heads somehow.
Yeah.
But generally, I think Icelanders, as I say, you know, just goes with the territory. It's just have to accept that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much for talking about this topic. It was really interesting to hear more about it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening, and please make sure to subscribe to our podcast, The Culture Bar.